So today, while riding in the car with a family member, just visiting from another family member, I had a conversation with this family member I was riding in the car with. And the conversation got really deep, as always, because the members in my family, we like to kind of match wits, so to speak, get some advice from each other and play off of each other's ideas and opinions and perspectives, which is very healthy because you gain a lot of wisdom from listening to others and comparing and, notes and things like that. And so, anyway, we were having this conversation and it landed on the topic or the subject of common sense. And in the passionate exchange of information, I blurted out, "Well, I'm not a common sense thinker. I don't think I don't use common sense as my basis for my decision making." Basically, that's what I was saying to this family member. And so this person says to me, "Well, no, you have to think with common sense." And I go, "No, I have common sense, but that's not how I operate in my day to day. There's nothing common thinking about me." And so this person says, "Well, we have to agree to disagree because everybody needs to operate with common sense." And I go, "Well, I'm not disputing that, but I do not operate with just the basis of common sense." And I just think that this is something that we need to talk about. And so I decided while that person was still talking, I took out my phone and I started typing in some notes because this is something that I really want to touch on so that some people can get a clear understanding, or hopefully get a clearer understanding of my perspective and understand what I mean when I say we have to think above common sense, because common sense is just that, it's common. So let's define the word common first and then we'll move on. Hello, seeds. Welcome back to Watering the Seed, where we don't just talk about growth, we get honest. We get honest about the soil, about the roots, about the weeds, okay? And the mindset that determines whether we stay planted or stay stuck. So today I want to talk about something we praise a lot, something we quote often, something we use to justify decisions and delay purpose, and sometimes even silence vision. Yes, common sense. Okay. So, as I was speaking about this relative and myself having this conversation about common sense, I did take some notes because I wanted to kind of go in a little bit deeper about this. And I didn't want to keep going back and forth because, as this family member said, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. And so I let them have their say and I just left it at that because, in order to clearly get an understanding of why I don't define my sense as common, I have to give more detail, in which I didn't have time to do that because the our ride was almost over. So I just thought I'd put it in the podcast, and I thought that this might be something that a lot of people may want to hear, may want to know about, and some people may actually need to hear this. So that's why the subject or the topic of today for this episode is when common sense keeps you common. Yeah, when common sense keeps you common. So let's get into it. Now, you might be able to tell that I'm like overly excited about this because I almost can't even get my words into complete sentences, but I'm going to try to get through this as best I can, calm myself down, and hopefully this message gets across the way that I intended to. So, to define the word common first, okay, and this is from the Merriam Webster dictionary, okay, this is the definition from Merriam Webster. And so it says, at its most basic level, common means belonging to or shared by two or more people or occurring frequently in everyday life. It then goes on to say happening often, being the standard, or being widely encountered. It's common, okay? It's possessed or participated in by a group or common or community. Have you ever heard the term group think? Yeah, common, okay? Keeps us stuck, keeps us all thinking and moving in the same direction. It's common. And then we have the word sense, which can be used as a noun or a verb. But we're not talking about sense in the sense of being able to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Not that sense. The sense that we're talking about here today is awareness or feeling. And it reads a vague or definite mental impression, intuition, or feeling, a sense of danger, that kind of thing. Okay. So when you put those two things together, you have a common thread of sensibility, okay? Common thread of sensibility. A common way of interpreting things, looking at it the same way. So let's get into that. Now, let me say this before somebody throws a shoe at me, okay? Because I want to be clear about some things. All right. So let me say this: common sense is not bad, okay? It's not. I mean, it's common sense. It's the one thing that helps us navigate through our youth, up until up and through adulthood. Okay, it keeps us from dangerous situations and making some decisions that may not require a whole lot of thought, but can impact us greatly. So, common sense is not a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying. Common sense tells us not to touch a hot stove. Common sense tells us not to spend your rent money on shoes. Common sense tells you to lock your doors at night, check your bank account before you swipe. So, common sense, it has its place. It definitely does. But here's where we need to go deeper, okay? Common sense becomes dangerous when it becomes the ceiling of our thinking, okay? Because common sense is usually built from what everybody already knows, what everybody already does, what everybody already accepts, and what everybody already expects. Okay. And if everyone is thinking the same way, moving the same way, responding the same way, and limiting themselves the same way, then common sense can quietly become a stagnant mindset. That's where I'm going with this. Because it becomes familiar thinking, it becomes survival thinking, it becomes this is just how life is type thinking. People like us don't do that type thinking. It becomes be realistic, that kind of thinking. And sometimes what people call being realistic is really just being restricted by what they have seen before. That's it. Plainly put, common sense can become common limitations. Yeah. See, it's common sense often comes from shared experiences, right? That means it can carry shared wisdom, but it can also carry shared limitations. For instance, if a whole family has only seen struggle, common sense may tell them, don't dream too big. If a community has only seen rejection, common sense may say, stay low, don't stand out, shrink yourself. If a person has been disappointed over and over again, common sense may say, don't trust, don't try, don't believe that again, don't believe in anything again, But higher wisdom, higher wisdom says, wait a minute. Just because something has been common does not mean it is correct. Doesn't mean that. Just because it's popular doesn't mean it's purposeful. Okay? Just because everybody understands it does not mean God endorsed it. And just because it makes sense to people does not mean it aligns with heaven. All right? Let's take it there. And that brings me to Romans 12 and 2. And this is so powerful. Okay, this is so powerful. This scripture says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. You guys have heard me say that so many times. Renewing of your mind. That word conformed, it matters. To conform means to take the shape of what is around you. That's what conforming is, taking the shape of what's around you, okay? Does that make sense? So if everybody around you thinks small, common sense says think small too. If everybody around you settles, common sense says settling is normal. This becomes the norm. Even in your family bloodline, it becomes a generational norm. And what's toxic could be normal to a family that's been commonized by this behavior. If everybody around you believes struggle is permanent, common sense says don't expect too much. But scripture says transformation does not come from copying the pattern around you. It comes from renewing the mind. That means the divine does not just want to change our situations, okay? He wants to change the level we think from. Because when the mind is renewed, the pattern breaks. Yes, the pattern breaks. One of the reasons common sense keeps people stuck is because it only trusts what it can explain, okay? Common thinking can block higher vision. You hear me, seeds? Common sense or common thinking can block higher vision. Common sense says, show me the money first, right? Faith says, take the step and trust God for provision. Common sense says, you're too old. I'm too old for this. That's what common sense says to us. But purpose, what the divine purposed for you or for your life, for your journey. Purpose says you are finally ready. Doesn't matter how old you are. If you're still here, you still have time. You're not too old. If you have a purpose, what that says is you're finally ready, meaning you've moved everything out of your life. You've experienced it all. And now you're finally ready to live in your purpose. Okay? Common sense says nobody in your family has done this. Your calling will tell you, then maybe you are the beginning. Common sense says protect yourself from disappointment. But wisdom will say heal, discern, and move with clarity. That's why Proverbs 3 and 5, it gives us instruction. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. Okay. And then it goes on, in all thy ways acknowledge him and he will direct our path. Okay. But that scripture right there, now, listen, it does not say do not have understanding. That's not what that's saying. Okay. It's not because it says lean not into thine own understanding. It's not telling us to not have understanding. What it's saying is do not lean on your own understanding. And there is a difference. Understanding is useful, but when we lean on it like it is the only support system we have, we limit ourselves to what we already know. Okay? Common sense thinking. It's limiting. And some of us are stuck, not because we are not gifted, because we are. We all carry gifts. We all do. It's not because we're not called. It's not because the door is not possible to open or the glass ceiling is not possible to break. It's none of that. It's because we keep leaning on old understanding, commonality, common sense thinking, common sense, common. We keep leaning on what hurt taught us. We keep leaning on what rejection taught us. We keep leaning on what survival taught us. We keep leaning on what the old version of us could comprehend. But higher level thinking requires us to say different. It requires us to say, God, I know what makes sense to me. But what are you saying? Ask the question. Don't lean into your own understanding because sometimes the next level will not make common sense, at least not at first. It will not. Starting the business may not make common sense. It didn't to me. Well, kind of did. But I mean, that's my level of common, okay? Thinking outside of the box, that's my common, but not thinking in the same lines that everybody else thinks. I think outside the box. Writing the book may not make common sense. It did to me, so I did it. Forgiving and moving forward may not make common sense to a lot of people, but it does to me because it's freeing. It's freeing the mind. So, this is my level of common sense, if you want to call it common. But to most people, this thought pattern is not considered to be common. So that's why I don't consider myself a common sense thinker. I think outside the box. I don't think along the lines of everybody else. Some things, yes, because it's we all have to have commonality. We're a community. But I believe that those who think outside the box are those that help the others that refuse to think outside the box to move forward, to take the risk, to expand their horizons. And we need those types of people. I need that type of person in my life, you know? Resting when you are used to striving may not make common sense, right? Leaving the familiar may not make common sense. But obedience does not always introduce itself as logic seeds. It does not. Sometimes obedience looks unreasonable before it looks fruitful, okay? Before it makes sense. Commonality can become very stagnating. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about commonality because commonality, means sameness, shared behavior, shared thought patterns, shared rhythm. Again, commonality is not always bad, okay? We need shared values. We need community. We need agreement around truth, okay? Safety and respect and love. But there is a kind of commonality that becomes very stagnating. It's when everybody keeps repeating the same mindset without questioning whether it's healthy. It's when, generations keep saying the same broken phrases. That's just how things are. That's just how we are. That's how our family does things. Don't tell people your business. That's a big one for me. Don't tell people your business. Don't get your hopes up. Oh, just be grateful and stop wanting more. Oh, who do you think you are? I know you all have heard these terms and they're very stagnating, but they're common. So I know you've heard some. One, two, three, maybe all of them. They're common. They're common phrases. And they're common phrases that keep us stagnant. Seeds. Sometimes commonality, it's not unity. Sometimes it's inherited. Limitation, wearing a family reunion t shirt. No digs. Okay, I'm just saying. I love family reunions. But let's just keep it 100. Sometimes commonality is not unity, it's inherited limitation. And that's where, First Corinthians, let's go into scripture again. First Corinthians 2 and 14, that's where it comes in. Scripture teaches us that the natural person does not receive the things of the Spirit of God because they are spiritually discerned. That means there are some things your natural mind will not fully understand until your spirit catches up with what God is trying to reveal to you. And that's important because common sense is often natural level thinking. That's exactly, it's natural level thinking. It asks, what do I see? Higher wisdom will ask, what is the Most High revealing? What is the divine revealing? Okay, your common sense will ask, what is what has happened before? What happened before in a situation like this? But your higher wisdom will say, what is possible now? What can I do now? Okay, common sense asks, what will people think? But your higher wisdom, Thinking outside that commonality, thinking outside the box, that higher wisdom will say, what has the divine assigned to you? What is your assignment? And that's the shift. That's what that's what makes the difference, seeds. That is what makes the difference. The scripture shows us that higher thinking often looks uncommon. Let's walk through the word for a minute because this story just came to mind. I want to just focus on this just for a moment and then we'll get back into it. Noah. Noah building an ark before the rain probably did not look like common sense, okay? In fact, it didn't look like common sense to the people back then. They laughed at him. They talked about it. They procrastinated. They did nothing while he was telling them that this rain was coming, okay? They did nothing. Common sense made everybody do the same thing as they always had done. But the rain did come, as we know, those of us that know this story. Abraham. Abraham leaving his country without a full map probably did not make common sense, but he did it. Okay. And it brought him wealth and everything else. Moses standing in front of Pharaoh probably did not make sense, at least not common sense, knowing that Pharaoh had the power to just end his life. But he did it. And he rescued hundreds of thousands of people who were in years and years and years of bondage, probably because the bondage made common sense. Okay, David facing Goliath, this giant with a slingshot. It probably didn't make common sense, but he hit that giant right smack dead in the middle of his forehead and took him out with one shot. Okay? And there's a bunch of stories that biblical stories that we can go through that didn't make common sense. Okay? But thinking outside the box was the victory. Not the commonality, but the thinking outside the box, the uncommon, the wisdom, the discernment. Thinking outside the box, not thinking like everybody else. Okay? So, one more scripture, okay? For thy thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. Okay, that's in Isaiah 55 and 8. And so that scripture right there, that one challenges the entire idea that human logic is the highest form of wisdom. Okay, and God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. So if we only live by common thought, we may miss divine thought. So let's tap into that divine thought. If we only move by common sense, we may miss uncommon instruction. If we only trust what everybody understands, we may reject what God is trying to reveal to us. And see, sometimes your next level is not waiting on more information, it's waiting on a higher thought, right? Common sense can keep us stuck. And let me give you a few ways how that can happen. How common sense can keep you stuck. Okay? It makes the familiar feel safe even when it's unhealthy. Common sense says at least I know what to expect. But higher wisdom says familiar does not always mean fruitful. Okay? And it doesn't. Knowing what to expect, sometimes that's not the best thought process. That's not the best pattern. That's common sense thinking that keeps you stagnant and keeping you from growing, keeping you from receiving, keeping you from your abundance. Some people stay in cycles because the cycle is predictable. It may hurt, but at least they know the rhythm. No. The divine did not call us to worship predictability. He wants us to trust, not to be predictable, but to trust. He called us to walk by faith, not by sight. All right? It turns past experiences into future limitations, this common sense thing. Common sense says, last time I tried it, it failed. That's so common. But higher wisdom says, what did you learn? Ask yourself that because that's the higher wisdom. What did you learn? And what will you do differently? Okay, that's thinking outside the box. thinking outside the community. Failure is not always a stop sign, seeds. It's not. Sometimes it's a strategy session. If you've listened to my podcast, if this is your first time, welcome. But if you've been here for a while, then you've heard me say quite a few times, I don't believe in losing. I believe those L's are lessons, not a failure. It's a lesson because there's a lesson in it. Just pay attention, think it through. Yeah. What did you learn? And what will you do differently this time? Common sense. It makes people's opinions sound like protection. It'll say, don't do too much. People will talk about you. Don't do that. But your higher wisdom says people talk anyway, okay? People talked when you were stuck too. Remember that. So go ahead and grow because they're going to talk anyway. So let them talk. Let them. I heard that from Mel Robbins. Yeah, Mel Robbins. Let them. Let them adjust. Let them whisper. Let them be confused. Growth is not always a group project, okay? In fact, it hardly ever is. So just let them. Let them whisper. Let them adjust to your greatness. Let them. Let them be confused about your growth. Let them, okay? It confuses comfort with confirmation. That's what common sense does. It confuses comfort with confirmation. Common sense says this feels easy, so it must be right. But sometimes purpose stretches you. Purpose, it will stretch you. Sometimes alignment, it challenges you. All right. Sometimes healing feels uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. It can feel very uncomfortable. But because the old version of you is losing control, that's it. That old version of you is losing control. So you hold on to what's common. Common sense tells me this. That's comfort. It feels comforting. But just because it feels comforting doesn't mean it's good. Again, healing feels uncomfortable because the old version of you is losing control. So be comfortable because the outcome is going to be very rewarding and freeing. Common sense keeps everyone thinking alike. And that might be the most dangerous part. When common sense becomes the standard, nobody questions the patterns. Nobody. It's the standard. Everybody keeps doing what everybody has always done. Everybody keeps accepting what everybody has always accepted. Everybody keeps shrinking because shrinking has been the normal. But scripture tells us not to conform. Remember, not to conform. So the renewed mind is not just a better mind, it's a non conforming mind. It's a mind that says, I know this is what has been common, but I am available for transformation. Okay? A higher level of thinking, right? And a higher level of thinking requires, renewed discernment. Yeah, so let's clear that. Let's tap on that just a little bit. Let's be clear, because thinking higher does not mean being reckless, okay? Let's just that's it doesn't mean being reckless. It does not mean ignoring being wise, ignoring wisdom. It does not mean calling every impulse, well, God told me. No, let's not do that. Let's not do that because some people will say, I'm moving by faith, but they're really moving without preparation, without counsel or accountability. Okay. And that's not higher thinking. Higher thinking is not careless. Higher thinking is discerning. It's discerning. If any one of you lack wisdom, let him ask God. Okay, that's James. That's scripture. That's James 1 and 5. I think 1 and 5. So higher level thinking starts with asking God for wisdom, not just information, not just opinions, not just what's trending, right? Not just what everybody in the group chat thinks. Okay, wisdom. Wisdom, because information tells you what is happening. Wisdom tells you how to move. So let's do it with wisdom. Common sense may tell you what is normal, but wisdom tells you what is necessary. Common sense may help you avoid obvious mistakes, and that's good. But wisdom helps you recognize hidden assignments within those obvious mistakes. And that's the difference. That is the difference. So, how do we move from common sense to kingdom wisdom? Hmm, so glad you asked. So glad you asked. How do we move from common sense to higher level thinking, right? So here's I have 5 things that I jotted down that I'm going to share with you. And we're just going to call them shifts, okay? We're going to shift our mindset, okay? Let's shift our mindset, okay? Stop making the crowd your compass. Okay? Let's shift this mindset. So, if everybody around you thinks the same way, ask yourself, is this wisdom or is this just repetition? The majority is not always, mature in a crowd. The majority of the people is not always mature. The crowd is not always clear. Sometimes, the divine gives a vision to one person before he gives it to the whole group. He gives it to one person before the group will understand it. So, if everybody around you thinks the same way, ask yourself, is this wisdom or is this just repetition? All right? That's the first shift. And then shift 2, test your thoughts against, scripture. I'm giving you a lot of scripture because scripture holds weight and it helps us to define our differences. As I was stating earlier in the beginning of this podcast, I was in a conversation with one of my family members, and in the heat of the conversation, they said to me, "We're just going to have to agree to disagree," because they were basically giving common sense weight that I didn't feel it deserved. Again, it's not a bad thing, but common sense will take you down, way down. Okay, keep you from growing, keep you from healing, keep you from doing a lot of things. It does. So, test your thoughts against scripture. Don't just ask, does this make sense? Ask, does this align with truth? Right? Philippians 4 and 8 tells us to think on things that are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, and of good report. That means our thought life needs a filter, right? Because listen, every thought that makes sense emotionally is not spiritually sound. It's not. So let's think. Let's do things of good report. Because every thought that makes sense emotionally is not spiritually sound. All right. And then shift number 3. Ask whether your common sense is coming from wisdom or is it coming from your wounds. We go through a lot of trauma. We go through a lot of trauma. A lot of us are still there, still living in toxic environments and so on and so forth. Okay. So a lot of it, the common sense is coming from wounds, old wounds. And I know that's going to step on a lot of toes, but I say it with love. I do. I say it with love. Sometimes we say, I'm just using common sense, when really we are protecting an old wound. We say, I don't trust people, but maybe the deeper truth is, I haven't healed from a betrayal. That's probably what that says. We say things like, I don't need anybody. But maybe the deeper truth is, I learned to survive alone. We say, I'm being realistic. That's a real common term. We hear a lot. I'm just being realistic. But maybe the deeper truth is, I'm scared, scared to hope again. So the question becomes, is this common sense or is this a coping mechanism with a clipboard, right? And my guess is yes, it is a coping mechanism. Common sense can be used as a coping mechanism. Look for the deeper thing. Look at the root of why you're saying what you're saying and how common it sounds and how stagnant it's keeping you. Shift number 4, give God permission to challenge what you call normal. Okay? Some of us do not. We do not need a new opportunity first, right? We need a new normal. We need a new way of thinking. We need a new way of responding, right? A new way of seeing ourselves and expecting better. Because when brokenness has been common, you've been experiencing this thing for so long, it's common. Then healing feels unfamiliar. Again, it's uncomfortable. Brokenness is common and healing is uncomfortable. When chaos has been common and peace feels suspicious, when rejection has been common and healthy love feels strange, when lack has been common, abundance feels uncomfortable. But unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. Sometimes unfamiliar means you are finally leaving the old patterns behind. Practice thinking from purpose, not pressure. Not pressure. Pressure asks, what will they think? But purpose will say, what am I assigned to build? Pressure may say, what if I fail? But purpose will say, what if obedience opens the door? Pressure may ask, how do I avoid discomfort? But purpose asks, how do I grow? Grow through this. How do I get through this thing? How do I grow through this thing? How do I heal through this thing? That's a higher level of thinking. It's not hype, it's not fantasy, it's not arrogance. It's alignment. It's alignment. And that's what we talk about over here at Watering the Seed. We talk about alignment, purpose, and impact. Healing generational norms that have been proven to be toxic and just keeps getting passed down from generation to generation. We want to heal those patterns. We want to stop that rippling effect, turn it to a positive ripple instead of a negative ripple, right? The renewed mind is not common. Seeds, I need you to hear this. The renewed mind is not common. The renewed mind does not keep bowing to old cycles. The renewed mind does not keep rehearsing the same limitations, and the renewed mind does not keep asking broken systems for permission to become whole. You don't need permission to become whole. When you have a renewed mind, that says I may learn this pattern, but I do not have to live from it. I may have learned this. This might be something that's been passed down through my bloodline, through from generation to generation, but I do not have to live from it. You can change it. You may have inherited this mindset, but you do not have to pass it down. You may understand why you thought this way, okay? You may understand, well, this is the way I think, this is the way my family thinks. You may understand that, but don't be available to not think higher. Don't make yourself unavailable to not think outside the box, to have a higher mindset, a different mindset, a healed mindset. Okay, that's transformation, that's growth. That's growth. That's watering the seed. Because a seed cannot become what it was created to be if it keeps taking instructions from the dirt that buried it. Ouch. Yeah, that. Yes, the dirt has purpose, but the dirt is not the destination, right? It has purpose, but it's not the destination. At some point, the seed has to break through. And the breakthrough requires a different kind of thinking. It requires watering. So if you water that seed, it breaks through the soil and it begins to grow. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up because I think we're like 40 minutes in, and yeah, it's been a minute. So today I just want to ask you, okay, where have you been calling something common sense when it may actually be common limitation? Okay, think about that. Where have you allowed what is normal around you to lower what is possible within you? Where have you used logic to avoid obedience? Where have you leaned on your own understanding instead of seeking, higher wisdom? And where's the divine asking you to renew your mind so you can stop conforming to a pattern that was never assigned to you in the first place, not assigned to your future? Okay, ask yourself those things because seeds, common sense may keep you accepted by common thinkers, but renewed thinking will position you for uncommon growth, abundance, legacy. And everybody may not understand it. Trust me. They may not understand it, but don't concern yourself with what people don't understand. They may not clap for it, they may not agree with it, but your assignment was never to stay stuck so people could stay comfortable. You are allowed to think higher. You are allowed to grow deeper. You are allowed to move differently than them, than the family, than the friends, than the community. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to stop calling stagnation wisdom. Because sometimes the thing that makes sense is the very thing that's keeping you in the same place. Sees this week, do not just ask what makes sense. Ask what is God revealing. Because common sense can explain where you are, but higher wisdom can lead you into who you are becoming. Okay? With that said, this has been a Watering the Seed production with Coach D. Jackson. That's me. And until next time, I love you so much. And I do hope you receive this and with love, because that's what it's where it's meant to be. It's given in love and respect and honor. Keep watering what God planted in you. Keep growing beyond, what tried to limit you. And remember, common thinking may feel safe, but renewed thinking produces transformation. Until next time,